Good. Okay, I'm Bill Jacoby, and my co-author Ciuk is here. Our paper, as frequently happens, of course, the title changed a little bit since the construction of the program. So we're now talking about values and social construction and individual choice of values. By way of background, essential definition, values, the common understanding is that they're general beliefs about the desirable and undesirable end states of human existence. And the way values are typically treated in the political science literature are as important determinants of individual behavior. And of course, values being these sort of frequently called fundamental building blocks of behavior, they're expected to influence choices and essentially everything human beings do in all parts of life, including politics. But at the same time, values have a social importance, and we believe that they actually provide the basis for political culture. And what we're going to try to do in this project here is integrate and put together the individual level influences and this notion of the social construction of values and the aggregate cultural importance of values as well. So some basic definitions here of individual value structures. We're going to be talking about the different types of value structures, so I'm going to make sure that we differentiate them. At the individual level, a person's value structure summarizes his or her pairwise choices between important values, and the end result of this summarization of pairwise choices is that essentially each person has a rank order of values, from the most important, the values they believe are most important, down to those that they believe are least important, and it's a values position within this rank order which determines essentially its influence on choices that the person makes in life. Societal value structure, on the other hand, is a general sense of which values go together and which ones imply contradictory states of existence. So while it might perhaps be possible for people to believe things like morality on the one hand and free expression are complementary to each other, the social understanding of those two values is that one is pretty conflicted with the other. These really don't go together. So our sense is that the social structure of values is that kind of thing. Presumably consensual understanding of what goes together, what doesn't, in terms of these fundamental states of existence at the end. And again, we argue that the societal value structure is critically important because it essentially determines what the political culture of the society is. Prior research on values has really not connected these two things. These are not unfamiliar ideas in values research, but they tended to proceed on different paths from each other. So Milton Rokeach is pretty much the father of individual value choice research. So he talks a lot about individual value structures, but doesn't say a whole lot about the social aggregation of values that presumably they produce. More recently, Shalom Schwartz and his various colleagues have emphasized what they call a universal structure of values, and what they are essentially talking about is this socially constructed configuration of values that we're discussing here. But they don't, it's not like they don't say that these exist, but their research really doesn't emphasize very much the individual level choices that people make. Now, what we're concerned about is consistency and the potential for conflict in between these two levels here, and we believe that there are several types of value conflict that could occur. On the one hand, it's possible to have individual value structures that are simply not consistent with the current social construction of values. So there are, if you can imagine, subcultures within a society that are alienated from the predominant norms and beliefs of a society. This would be what we're talking about here, where the fundamental understandings about what's good and bad in a subculture conflict with the predominant norms in society. So that's one type of value conflict. Another type of value conflict occurs when people agree on what the societal structure of values are, but they disagree on which values are most important and which values are less important, leading people to strive to attain conflicting end states and objectives from human life. We think it's important to develop links between these two different types of value structures here, because we think this provides an important basis for understanding of what consensus is in society and what the nature of conflict is in society. So the basic questions motivating our analysis is, first of all, is there such a predominant value structure in American society of the type that Schwartz claims exists? If so, are individual choices consistent with this value structure? And how are the dominant value preferences of interesting subgroups configured and distributed with respect to this consensual value structure? Our strategy. Schwartz's universal value model is usually presented as a geometric model where values are points within a space, and the more similar two values are, the closer the points are within the space, the more values imply conflicting end states of existence, the farther apart they are as points in the space. Schwartz has found in a number of different settings what he calls a circumplex structure, which is basically a circular array of points. So it's actually pretty simple when it comes down to it. This is the societal level phenomenon, and this is the thing that we're saying doesn't really address the notion of individual value structures. What we want to do is add geometric objects to Schwartz's model representing these individual value structures. And as we'll show you in a few moments here, we argue that if people's value choices are consistent with the societal value structure, we should be able to show each individual as a vector within the space. And the vector for each person emanates from the origin. It basically points in the direction of each person's most important values, but this is kind of a clumsy thing to say, but each vector is oriented so that the ordering of the projections from the value points onto the vector are consistent with the person's rank order of the values. It's a simple idea, even though it's a tongue twister to say. The differing value choices in this model are represented by differing orientations of the vector. If you have two people with vectors that have a small angle between them, they essentially point in the same direction, they have similar value choices. Vectors that point in opposite directions represent people with opposing value choices. Now, there are several different types of conflict between the individual and societal structures. Again, some people might articulate value choices that are just inconsistent with the overall social construction. And if that's the case, then it should be impossible to position a vector in the space representing their choices. At the same time, even if people have choices that are consistent with the overall societal construction of values, their particular choices might conflict with each other, which would be represented, as I said, as vectors pointing in opposite directions of the space. Let me give you a very quick hypothetical example here to show what we're talking about. Imagine we have three values. Imagine we have three people. The values are A, B, and C. The people are 1, 2, and 3. The three people rank order the value importance as follows. For person 1, A is most important, B is second, C is third. Person 2, A is most important, C is second, and B is least important. Person 3, value C is most, B is second, A is least. Now, a model that might represent this shows the 3 points, the values as points, and we're going to try to show each person as a vector. So here are the values, and these are smaller than they probably should be. A, B, and C here. A and B are close together, indicating that they're relatively compatible values. C is farther away, indicating it suggests a conflicting end state. If we want to show a vector for person 1, who you'll remember wanted A most, or said A was most important, B was second most important, and C third most, this is the origin of the space here. This person's vector points in that direction, and the perpendicular projections from the value points onto actually a line collinear to the vector coincide to the ordering of the values. So A is closest to the tip, B comes second, C comes third. In this sense, that that vector represents this person's value structure. And of course, in real life, we're going to have more values and certainly many more people than this. What about person 2? Now remember, person 2 said A is most important, C is second most important, B is third most. Well, there is no way you can put a vector in this space that has the projections from the value points onto that vector that corresponds to that ordering. This is a person whose value choices are inconsistent with the societal structure. Person 3, on the other hand, this person likes C most, B second, and A most. We could show that person as a vector pointing down here, and if we put person 1 and person 2, these are two people with conflicting value structures. So this is the kind of model that we're going to fit to the data here. The data that we're going to use come from the 2006 Cooperative Congressional Election Study. Started with 1,000 respondents. Of those, 775 of them gave complete rank orders for the values. We're using 7 values that were included on the post-election wave of the survey there. We think these values are pretty central in American political culture. What we did was, of the 775, we randomly selected 150. We're going to carry out a multidimensional scaling analysis on their value choices to estimate the two-dimensional configuration of value points. This leaves us with 625 respondents. There's a regression-based procedure that we use to locate their vectors. It's a regression-based procedure, so there's an R squared. If a person, when we fit their vector, if they have a high R squared, that indicates their choices are consistent with the societal structure. Low R squared indicates the choices aren't consistent. And then the array of vectors will actually tell us about value conflict. Here's the space. These are 7 points representing the values: social order, economic security, equality, freedom, individualism, patriotism, and morality. This is consistent with what Schwartz found. So this is sort of a manifestation, we believe, of his universal structure. The data fit really well. It's an excellent multidimensional scaling solution. It's largely consistent with that. And so not much more to be said about that. We're going to, again, interpret this as the social structure. Now, we fit the individual vectors. We get an R squared for each of the 625 people. This is the distribution of R squared values. So the mode is most people's value structures fit quite well with that overall structure, but there are some people here who don't fit very well. And so the question is, do these people represent a different subculture or differing subcultures, or is it error? Is it just random error? Giving rank orders is not necessarily an easy thing to do. So our argument is that if it is systematically different subcultures, we ought to find systematic patterns in the people that are who has good fit, who has bad fit. If it's error, should be largely unpredictable. And since I'm running short on time, it's largely unpredictable. So the people who have bad fit, there's nothing systematic that distinguishes them from people with good fit, so we assume it's error. So the full model with the 625 vectors with those 7 values, all this shows here, ignore this for the moment here, all of these things here are the terminal points of 625 vectors. I've jittered their locations so you can see the differing densities here. This is the mean vector, so that is the average vector. The length of the vector is important, the length of the mean vector is important. Shorter means wider diversity in value choices, and again, the vectors are around the whole circle, so there is enormous heterogeneity in people's value choices. The question is there systematic variability excuse me, in these value choices? So what we're going to do is look at the mean vectors for various subgroups and see if there are systematic differences between them. So if we take gender groups, males and females, and age groups, basically no differences in the predominant choices of males and females. Age groups show differences in the directions you would expect, but the differences are not terribly pronounced. And this is the main story here. Race and religion. Virtually no value differences across racial groups. Religious differences. These are people who say they have no religious affiliation. These are the people who gave religious affiliations. So differences, but not conflict. Same thing with income groups. The same thing with education groups. Now, where it gets interesting, particularly for us as political scientists, is when we look at value differences by party ID and ideology. This is the only place where we find value conflict, where Republicans and Democrats, liberals here and conservatives here, exhibit not only differing but conflicting value choices. So, what this leads us to here is, first of all, it's very important that we replicated Schwartz's universal structure. Other researchers have said this isn't replicable, and in fact, there's sort of a methodological artifact in the way that he approaches here, but we did it a different way, we got the same results. This speaks very strongly to the validity of his concept there. Individual value structures, largely consistent with social construction. We think this is neat because, again, what we believe we've done is integrated 2 different strains of value research and shown that they're nicely compatible with each other. It's easy to reconcile them. Again, for those of us who are political scientists, the interesting thing is this gives us information about value disagreements and conflict in society. And the predominant value structure is pretty consensual in the United States. These social, demographic, and economic subgroups, they're different but not conflicting. Conflict occurs with politics, with partisan and ideological groups. It's an inherently political phenomenon, and if we want to relate this to everyday life and important things, the current state of polarization in the United States is not superficial. It is not the mass public shallowly echoing what elites do. This polarization is connected to people's fundamental ideas about what's important and not important in life. So this isn't going away anytime soon by our evidence. So hopefully I came in close enough. Anyone there?